All right, some notable dates on the upcoming schedule. The last day of the Stanley Cup Final, if we're to go to Game 7, would be Monday, June the 24th. And then just 4 days later would be the NHL Draft. And then just a couple of days later would be NHL Free Agency. And that is my first topic of discussion with our NHL insider, Darren Dreger. First of all, thanks for being here. How are you, pal?
I'm doing well. You know, you missed another key date on the graphic.
What's that?
July 2nd or 3rd. Because that means that I've begun the trek out west to my lake property in Manitoba, and the season for me is essentially over.
You go to one lake property, LeBrun goes to another. So we've got to get you to those lake properties, but first I got to ask you, because those dates, we've talked about it, everything's so jammed together. You've got the end of the Cup Final, you've got the draft, you've got free agency. Could you see more deals, signings, trades potentially happening really this week?
This week might be a bit of a stretch. Now, as soon as I say that, I jinx myself, right? In the insider business, you have to be careful when you're even kind of inching towards what might be a guarantee. But because it's so busy, you know, NHL management groups are coming out of the combine in Buffalo. Prior to that, it was the pro and the amateur scouting meetings. You had the Memorial Cup sandwiched in all of that. So they've got a lot going on. Talked to a couple of executives earlier today, and the sense that I'm getting is that, there's a lot of dialogue out there. There's a lot of chatter. Some of it is revisiting from pre-trade deadline, but the expectation is that when the National Hockey League all focuses and shifts over to Vegas for the draft, that's when we'll start to see more of the heavy lifting.
We thought maybe because the Canucks were out in the second round and they have so many restricted free agents and some real key ones that maybe, we were hearing reports last week they might be getting close to deals with Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm. And then Zadorov's agent, Dan Milstein, called it fake news, which was hilarious.
Love Dan. Yeah.
That was just a hilarious tweet. Even Tyler Myers, someone we thought would maybe take a hometown discount, is not signed yet. So where do the Canucks stand with their big restricted free agent? Well,
it's hard to imagine how they're going to be able to keep all three of those guys, especially the two hulking defensemen in Myers and Zadorov. Look, Zadorov likes Vancouver. He thinks he's a real good fit with the Vancouver Canucks. I'm sure that Patrick Allvin and Rick Tocchet and everybody in hockey operations in Vancouver likes the size of Zadorov and the fact that you can play him higher in your pairings, or if everyone's healthy, you can move him down as well. But you have to go through a negotiation. As much as Zadorov would like to stay, they really haven't started negotiating yet. But they will. And I'd say the same thing of Lindholm, right? There's been preliminary discussions. Everything is amicable. But the market for centers isn't that deep when you look at the potential unrestricted free agents. So is Elias Lindholm looking for the most money possible or the best fit? And that's what he and his family are going to have to come to terms with. I think Vancouver, again, likes the idea of keeping him around, but can they afford him? And on the open market, as a centerman, he's going to demand a fair amount.
Let's talk about the Winnipeg Jets. You just told us last month that Kevin Cheveldayoff might consider someone like Nick Ehlers, who will be a restricted free agent next season, might consider moving him to help out maybe on the blue line, maybe a top four defenseman. We get reports out there that maybe Ehlers would welcome a trade. Any further information on that?
Look, I believe that Nick Ehlers likes the idea of staying in Winnipeg to the conclusion of his contract. So he's going into the final year of his deal. Do I think that Ehlers wants to extend in Winnipeg? I don't get that sense. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's unhappy. And there's a lot of change, and there will be more change in Winnipeg. That just happens organically, automatically. You've got a familiar face in Scott Arniel, who's now the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. But his name has been out there. I just didn't randomly throw that out there the last time we visited. But I also, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think that it's a front burner topic for Jets management either. They've got some things that they're going to have to consider and look at. You look at their pending unrestricted free agents. Sean Monahan was an excellent fit in Winnipeg. Is there a chance that they can convince him, if the dollar is right and the term works, to stay? Well, you can continue to sign contracts and extend players. It's not an unlimited salary cap.
Right.
So I think that Cheveldayoff would be willing to listen to interest. I'm sure that there is interest in Nikolaj Ehlers.
Let's talk about the fact that last week, your colleague and mine, Pierre LeBrun, told us that Jake Markstrom would consider waiving his no-move clause to go to New Jersey. We know Tom Fitzgerald's very interested in him. Friend of the network, Bruce Garriock, wrote on Sunday that the Senators have been talking with Craig Conroy about Markstrom. First of all, that's almost a two-part question. Are the Sens already out on Joonas Korpisalo? We're just going into year 2 of that 5-year deal.
Well, Ottawa's looking for an upgrade in goal. They are, and that's because Korpisalo and Anton Forsberg just couldn't find their way last year. So can you risk going through that sort of scenario in that tandem again next season? And the answer to that is no. So you have to figure out, okay, what is an affordable upgrade on what we already have? So Steve Staios is making calls on all of these guys. It sure sounds like UC Saros is going to stay with the Nashville Predators, extend there. You've got Linus Ullmark in the Boston Bruins. You know, there's some chatter out there as he goes into the final year of his deal that maybe he's willing to be a little bit more flexible with his no-trade protection as long as there's an extension coming back the other way. So that then brings us back to the goalie market of Jacob Markstrom and the Calgary Flames. Yeah, there's lots of interest there. Look, Bruce is an excellent reporter. Yes, there's been dialogue between Staios and Craig Conroy of the Calgary Flames, but here's what I need to make clear here. It's not like Calgary is trying to unload Jacob Markstrom. They're not. He's under contract. They like the idea of having that high level, that quality goaltender. But if somebody steps up with the right options, a deal that Craig Conroy has to consider for the short term and the long term, of course he's going to do that. So what is Tom Fitzgerald and the New Jersey Devils willing to part with? Is it that 10th pick overall, right? Could it be a collection of draft picks? Could it be prospects? Could it be a young NHL roster player? All of those things would be considered by Conroy and the Calgary Flames, but that's what it's going to take. This isn't an unload by any stretch of the imagination. Markstrom is still an elite-level goalie.
I want to show you, Dreg, some of the other big restricted free agents that are out there. It's a very intriguing list right now, and lots of really, really fascinating names. Couple of Red Wings on the list, couple of Carolina Hurricanes, and of course, Martin Nečas is one of them, and we keep hearing about Nečas' name. In fact, there was some talk that maybe he could be moved as early as last week. That hasn't happened yet. Any update on Carolina's situation?
Well, look at the Carolina players here, and there are two prominent ones, as you've identified, and that's just scratching the surface in Carolina. Now, the messaging that I think is kind of being overlooked from Carolina's perspective and Martin Nečas is that, again, they own the rights to this player. You know, he's been a good player. You know, has he been held back a little bit in terms of where he's played by Rod Brind'Amour? I guess that's the argument of the player and his family, but that doesn't mean that the Carolina Hurricanes are unhappy with Martin Nečas. So they're not giving this guy away. Better than half the league has inquired. Why wouldn't you? Because, again, if you give him a better situation, maybe a more prominent role on the power play, that age-specific player is really hard to find via trade. It is. So they've got a lot of calls coming into Carolina, not just from Martin Nečas, but for a number of different players. But he's a good one, and lots of teams would love to have him.
You mentioned a lot of calls are coming into Carolina. Any update on their GM situation? Because Donnie Waddell is now the president of operations in Columbus.
Yeah, look, I mean, Tom Dundon, the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes, is considering just about everything, right? You know, there were reports last week about the possibility of Jarmo Kekalainen and the fact that, you know, there's been some discussion there. I guess the one thing that I would wonder about specific to Jarmo is that you're talking about a high-experienced guy, a guy with a decent track record. Now, there'll be Columbus Blue Jackets fans who have issue with that and would debate me on that. But he is highly respected. I know this from NHL circles. You know, is Tom Dundon going to step up, open the vault of the bank, and pay Jarmo Kekalainen? Doesn't sound like that's what he wants to do.
He doesn't want to do that with anyone.
With anyone, including, you know, Rod Brind'Amour, the on-again, off-again negotiation that finally ended up in an extension of Brind'Amour and his staff. Eric Tulsky is a name that has been on a lot of up-and-coming general manager lists. So right now he's the interim GM, but I think in the meantime, Tom Dundon is going to continue to have conversations. But there's also a growing sense out there that Dundon wants to make sure that he has, if not final say, heavy influence on everything
So that's
that is done in hockey operations.
probably
That's
keep
hard.
a lot of veteran GMs away from that job.
It's challenging. Look,
Yeah.
we all have bosses, right?
Yeah.
And there wouldn't be many general managers out there with full autonomy. There are some, but there wouldn't be many. It's a challenge. But Jarmo Kekalainen, again, is used to doing things his way.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean if you're Tom Dundon, you don't have that conversation. Dundon's going to have to decide whether or not experience matters more than the possibility of giving Eric Tulsky the reins and seeing what he can do with it.
This is fun.
Yeah.
Just a couple of weeks away from the lake cottage.
We're getting close.
Here
bud.
we go. Oh, sorry, cabin.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's out
Bear
west.
issues at Lake of the Prairie.
Oh, boy. Okay.
So, yeah, the Dreger Safari will be upgraded this
I was
this
just
summer.
going to say, look forward for a future edition of Darren Dreger's Safari World with bear issues. Thanks, buddy.